Good day, my lovelies! Welcome to today's video. I would like to start off by posing you a question. What color do you prefer, pink or blue? Depending on your answer, it could showcase one of the most basic types of gender influence. For many in society, pink is strictly viewed as a feminine color, while blue is seen as a masculine color. But why is this the case? According to UMKC's Women's Center, especially in the 19th century, it started off completely different, with blue being the more feminine color since it appeared to be more dainty, while pink was perceived to be more masculine as it showed to be a color of strength. Yet this view changed over time, with pink now being viewed as an emotional color that signifies femininity, while blue is now seen as a more vigorous color that signifies masculinity. This showcases the current beliefs we hold towards color in our gender identity. The only difference is the symbolism towards these colors are subjective, but in their basic form, pink is for girls, while blue is for boys. Now, some of you might be confused on how something as simple as color can influence our gender, but it's not just the colors, but the symbolism behind them, which creates this influence that triggered us over time to put ourselves in these boxes of what we are told gender is supposed to be. This influence is only amplified by the trends we see on social media, if it be the alpha male podcast or tradwives on TikTok. The exaggerated beliefs they show towards gender are what encourage harmful expectations to continue and grow. In order to combat these expectations, we must educate ourselves and realize how we don't have to be influenced to act like those we see in media, or even have the fear for showcasing our authentic selves, no matter the ridicule we might receive. This is what I hope to explore in today's video, on how we view being vulnerable, why it's difficult, and the effects these expectations have taken on our gender over time, showcasing the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all, and the aftermath it leads us to carry. But now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 1. What we need to know. To start us off, what even is vulnerability? I know our heads are already working up an answer, but simply put, vulnerability is the state of exposing yourself, with the possibility of being harmed either emotionally or physically. This possibility of being hurt is what triggers those to step away from being vulnerable and exposing themselves. William Neil Edger, a professor of human geography at the University of Exeter, says the dislike of vulnerability comes from that very stigma and possibility that believes that being vulnerable in any way makes you susceptible to harm. Jason M. Armfield, a psychology researcher at the University of South Australia, adds to the conversation with his knowledge of how fears are created and how it interacts with the negative view of vulnerability. In simple terms, he states fears are created by past experiences and your perception of the situation, meaning if we perceive a situation as traumatic, our brains will wire itself to avoid it in order to not be hurt again. That's where vulnerability comes in, because Armfield says fear arises when we perceive ourselves as vulnerable, because we are being put in a situation where we aren't in control, where the outcome is unpredictable, and our feelings of danger are at an all-time high. All of this is what triggers us to dislike everything about vulnerability, since in our brains, it's wired as a danger to be avoided. But even so, people like Dr. Carmen, a renowned therapist, says that in the end, preventing vulnerability is what hides our true selves from the world, resulting in us feeling unseen. She also states how external factors are what trigger this prevention, like diplomacy, people-pleasing behavior, fear, avoidance, and silence. Yet, there is one factor I would like to add to Dr. Carmen's list of factors, and that's gender. It's a simple yet complex factor that has been left out, since our gender does affect our ability to be vulnerable, due to all the expectations that have been normalized over time. These expectations change based on our gender, but by how much? The expectations for females in society are very close to the symbolism the color pink carries, but on a way bigger scale. We ladies must remain emotionally mature, since we must be able to prioritize others' feelings over our own, even though we are always being the ones called overly sensitive in the end. Even in school or work, we are expected to hide or dumb down our knowledge and skills in order to not become intimidating to our male counterparts. And don't forget, we must keep up with all the latest beauty standards so we can stay wanted and sought after. Yet, these standards are always changing and unattainable, telling us we can't be too thin or you look unhealthy, but you also can't be too big or guess what? You still look unhealthy. We must be kind, strong, gentle, too much skin, not enough beautiful, makeup, thin, too much makeup, don't cover yourself, smile more. All of these standards are telling us to be something different, which leaves us stuck chasing the next thing. But our biggest expectation comes from the motherhood mandate, which is the traditional belief that a woman's sole purpose is to be a mother and caregiver, not only to her children, but also her husband. Being told you must stay at home, doing all the cooking, cleaning. On top of that, looking after the kids while your husband's at work. And we know you can't complain, since this is your purpose, isn't it? These are the expectations women are told to carry, yet are the polar opposite of the expectations our male counterparts are told to carry. Similar to pink, the symbolism of the color blue is a close beginner of what you should expect to think when you start putting together your ideas on the expectations males face in society. Males are expected to be strong in all aspects of their lives, which encourages them to be ambitious in their wants, which isn't the problem, but they are told they must show dominance and excessive competitiveness in order to get what they want. Males are also expected to hate any form of emotion, since if they embrace it, they are immediately called weak, with phrases like, "boys don't cry," or "man up" being common. These phrases are what discourage vulnerability in men, which leads many to not seek support when struggling, since again, it's viewed as weak, making men have to suffer alone because they must remain independent and strong for themselves. It only gets worse when men are told their purpose is to be leaders at work and the sole provider for their families, ensuring financial safety and burdens. When this is challenged, it hurts their own ego and adds to this fear of weakness that must be avoided like all types of vulnerability. Yet the biggest avoidance men are told to have is to avoid anything, absolutely anything, that can be considered feminine in order to keep this strong image of masculinity. Overall, the pressures for both males and females to keep up their expectations are excessively difficult and harmful due to each gender's expectations being made to go against each other, just like oil and water. Since how are we supposed to connect if our fear of not maintaining our gender image is what keeps us in this box, where one must be dominant while the other must be compliant? It leaves no room for vulnerability, which makes us feel unseen, just like Dr. Carmen said. This difference of expectations only worsens when you put the male gaze into the mix. The male gaze is essentially the concept in feminist theory that describes how women in media are often portrayed in ways to appeal to a male's perspective, if that be emphasizing their appearance or certain parts of their bodies for male pleasure, basically being viewed as objects to be desired and wanted by men. Laura Mulvey, a British feminist film theorist and filmmaker, would bring this to light in her 1973 essay, Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema, where she would argue all these issues on how females were portrayed in media, even coining the term male gaze. If some of us were wondering, the examples of the male gaze in media can be seen in many of the films taken in the golden age of Hollywood, with films like Vertigo or Rear Window using camera frames to make women appear as desirable objects. In recent years, though, movies like The Suicide Squad have been seen using lingering shots of female characters, emphasizing their bodies rather than personality that goes towards the plot. Since come on, we all saw how they kept the camera a little too close on Harley Quinn. Yet the male gaze isn't just movies. It can be in anything, like books, comics, and video games. This gaze has been a big influence on how femininity is portrayed, which has reinforced these unattainable beauty standards and limited the representation of the women we see in media. This is what caused new filmmakers and women to challenge the male gaze by creating what they call the female gaze, which chooses to present women in media as complex characters with real thoughts and motivations, rather than just desirable eye candy. Examples of the female gaze movement being pursued in media are with movies like Little Women, which showcases women challenging traditional gender roles, while each having their own ambitions. There's also the movie Portrait of the Lady on Fire, which focuses on both emotional and intellectual connections in two women, rather than using them for male pleasure. The idea of the female gaze is becoming more and more prominent in media, allowing real representation of women. Even though there has been progress challenging the power that is held by the male gaze, with the creation of the female gaze, it still stands as a question: how do these expectations even come to be? And how are we taught to fit into these boxes? Well, these gendered expectations were made from a wide mixture of historical, cultural, and social influences that have shaped how we view gender over time. From a historical background, gendered roles were associated with survival needs, making men the hunters and warriors, while women were the caregivers and homemakers. As time went on, these roles stuck and became a cultural influence that integrated within many cultures, creating norms on the roles men and women should play, even when it wasn't necessary anymore. It can also be said that all cultures have had their own gender norms, but some more than others have enforced those norms more strictly, like Middle Eastern and Latin American cultures, along with cultures under Confucian influences, all of which essentially believing in male dominance and female submissiveness. Yet even so, the influence that comes from simple social interactions is the most prominent way we learn these gendered roles. From the age of 2, children are already able to develop concepts of gender identity, and by the age of 4, these concepts become more stable. But how are children even realizing these concepts when they're so young? Yes, we know it's because of social interactions, but let me go into more depth. In truth, we are the reason children learn gender norms. We unintentionally teach gender norms to children through subtle comments we probably don't even think twice about. For example, if you see a crying boy, it's common for people to say, "Oh, don't cry, you gotta stay strong." While if it was a crying girl, you would hear, "Oh, it's okay to cry, you're gonna be fine." These types of comments, even if we don't realize it, reinforce gender norms and encourage children to act on these certain behaviors since they believe it's what's normal. And not only is it what we tell children that influences them, but also what they see around them. Something as simple as going to a store will split them by gender, if it's the clothing aisle or the biggest culprit of it all, the toy aisle. From the pink Barbies on the left and the blue trucks on the right. Toys reinforce so many traditional gender roles and expectations just by play, since girls are typically told to pick the more delicate toy, while boys are told to pick the more tougher looking one. Yet in the end, it doesn't even matter, since no matter where the influence stems from, we are still teaching our youth the standards for gender, which will only grow as they age, normalizing behaviors and their perception of the world, creating a box in which they must fit. Now that we have a basic understanding of where gender expectations originate from, and the knowledge of how we are even taught these gender norms to begin with, I would now like us to go through some examples of gender expectations from the past to present day. Let's begin with past expectations that occurred during the 1950s to 1970s. For women during this time, they would be pushed by the ideals of Susie Homemaker, the representation of the perfect housewife. What's even more interesting is Susie Homemaker would occur after the well-known Rosie the Riveter, because after World War II, women would be highly encouraged to leave their newfound jobs in order to return to their home lives that encouraged the following ideals of maintaining the household, being the sole cook and cleaner, remaining well-dressed and attractive at all times, keeping a cheerful yet submissive attitude, and of course, prioritizing your husband and children over nonsense like careers or even yourself. This is what Susie Homemaker embodied for women, and what was the expectation for women during this time. Now also, for all my friends just listening to me with their headphones, feel free to come back while I show some examples of women in the past. Now that that's over, let's move on to the male expectations during this time. For men in this time period, they were expected to be the sole breadwinners for their families, along with being the ones who made all the decisions in the household, since men during this time were expected to know what's best for everyone. Even so, they would have limited to no involvement with raising their children, or doing domestic chores, since who was that expected from? Yes, women. That's correct. But don't let me get ahead of myself. Men were also expected to look professional, often being pictured in formal attire in media. Lastly, during this time period, men were expected to remain strong while being emotionally reserved, since we all know in these people's eyes, showing emotion is too feminine, and that's what men would be told to think. Now, here's some examples of men in the past. Now that we've covered the past expectations for men and women, let's go over more present examples that we see today. Women today have moved further than our expectations from the past, yet they still linger around us. We now are expected to excel in both our careers and domestic spheres, creating a balance between them both. In the workplace, we are expected to be assertive, but not in a way that is overly quote-unquote aggressive, just like how we are told we must be nurturing yet independent for ourselves. We also are expected to maintain a youthful appearance, but at the same time must avoid showing too much skin, or we won't be taken seriously. Now, here are some examples of women today facing these expectations. Now let's go over the male expectations of today and how its change has been difficult for some men to process. Men today are expected to lean into having higher emotional intelligence while keeping their picture of strength intact, having to display both traditional masculine traits and modern sensitivity. They are also expected to support the career choices of their partner while trying to maintain their role as the main breadwinner, even if it's compromised. In this day and age, men are also expected to take on more domestic responsibilities and be highly involved in the lives of their children while maintaining career excellence. Here are some examples of men facing these expectations today. Now that we know the past and present expectations for men and women, let's compare them together and take notice of how things have changed. For women, we now have become more accepted in the workplace, no longer having to stick to the perfect housewife image. Yet we still have to deal with beauty standards and how we appear to others, otherwise we might be seen as less than. We must also carry the burden of balancing both our careers and domestic responsibilities, with constant criticism of our decision to work due to the belief of some that it's unruly. Men, on the other hand, are becoming more accepted in being emotional, which is a good thing, but also leaves some men feeling pressured, since it's such a deep-rooted expectation for men embracing any type of vulnerability to be against everything that makes them masculine. This causes internal struggles within men, which is most of what they are dealing with today, because compared to the past, they now must be able to deal with women taking over positions of leadership or even being the breadwinner in their household. Even having to make big decisions together with their partner might seem difficult since they crave control. Even the men who try to embrace the change of increased emotional intelligence get criticized for being too feminine. Some men even try to get into caregiving roles, like being a stay-at-home parent, but face stigmas for doing so, because once again, it's too feminine. With this in mind, we have now finished comparing the two time periods' expectations. So let's continue on the subject of what's feminine and masculine by looking at the Google image results for the words femininity and masculinity. When you search up the word femininity into Google, you get a wide range of image results, some of which showing more traditional views on femininity, if that be puffy dresses or bright red lipstick, while others are pushing for women empowerment and awareness towards the struggles of being a woman. Some images even decide to take a stance balancing traditional roles for women and empowerment, expressing how you can quote-unquote be powerful in pink, or how your most powerful asset is femininity. On the other hand, the image results for masculinity are very divided, with some showing big, bulky men showing off their strength. But the interesting thing is, most of the results that I looked through showed the broken image of masculinity, explaining how it's harmful and how men are trying to break out of this image. Now that's the end of our section on covering Google image results for the words femininity and masculinity. Chapter 2. The effects of the social standard. Okay, my lovelies, do you remember how I told you social interactions are the most prominent type of influence? Well, this also applies to social media. It's the same interaction, just different than your normal face-to-face. It can even be said that social media actually has a greater influential impact on us than we think, due to its wide range of audiences and easy accessibility, which allows more interactions to take place anytime you want. This can be both a good and bad thing, depending on what you expose yourself to. This leads us to our next section of how trends on social media only exaggerate gender expectations to wide audiences, where they can be easily influenced by them. The two most well-known trends that not only exaggerate but feed into gender expectations are the TikTok tradwife and alpha male. With this in mind, let's explore what exactly each trend is. A traditional wife, or commonly known as a tradwife, is a woman who embraces ultra-traditional gender roles, choosing to be a homemaker while their husband acts as the provider. Tradwife values have a strong focus on homemaking, domestic skills, taking on the caregiver role, maintaining modesty in their appearance and behavior, but most importantly, believing in the pleasure of their husbands and being responsible for raising their children. There are different types of tradwives, though, who choose to embrace specific values. For example, Astine Williams, a tradwife TikToker with 194K followers, centers her content on biblical submission, which is the belief that willingly surrendering your will and placing trust in God will provide you a greater path. While tradwives like Hannah Needleman, who has a TikTok followership of 55K, uses her platform to promote traditional family values and homemaking lifestyles to women. Then we have the most well-known and prominent tradwife on TikTok, with a following of 11.4 million followers. Nara Smith, who is known for her elaborate cooking videos where she makes everything from scratch, along with her homemaking content, all of which featuring her elegant appearance and soft-spoken voice. Here's an example of the content she offers. Let me know in the comments what gender expectations you think she embodies.
Here's everything I prepped for my husband for the next 2 days. He wanted high protein options, so that's what we're doing today. I started by making my classic chocolate chip oatmeal bake. I mixed all of my dry ingredients with my wet, gave that a good mix and popped that in the oven for about an hour. Then I got started on a Greek-inspired salad that would go with all the protein. I chopped up some cucumber, yellow bell pepper, orange bell pepper, olives, and combined all of that in a big bowl. I also decided to add some red onions and feta cheese to this. I added some good olive oil, red wine vinegar, salt and pepper. I love prepping salads like these because they don't wilt and keep in the fridge really well. I moved on to making some bulgogi chicken. I added gochujang oil, paste, miso, toasted sesame oil, soy sauce, and brown sugar. I gave that a good mix, set that aside, and then got started on my quinoa, which I just boiled in some chicken bouillon and water. To go with our Greek-inspired salad, I made some Greek chicken meatballs. One of my favorite spices to add to this is a dash of cinnamon. Just trust me on that. Once they were done, it was time to put everything away. I also made some Moroccan ground beef. I set that aside, put my quinoa away. The same with my salad. I also prepped 2 hot sauces. Didn't cook my chicken so that we could just cook it up whenever we needed, and this is everything I prepped. Since my toddlers saw fruit roll-ups at the store, they've been asking for them. So today when they asked for a snack, I decided to just make them some. I decided to make 2 different kinds, one of them being mango pineapple and the other one being strawberry raspberry. I started by chopping up my mango and pineapple, adding that to a blender alongside some lime and brown sugar. I blended that up and set that aside. I moved on to cutting up my washed strawberries. I added them to my blender as well, found some raspberries in the fridge, and topped that off with a squeeze of lemon and some brown sugar as well. Since I didn't want any seeds in my fruit roll-ups, I strained my puree. Once it was all smooth, I poured it onto my baking tray, making sure to spread it out evenly, and repeated that with both of my purees. I set my oven to about 180 and let these bake for about 6 hours. And once they were all dried out, I transferred them to parchment paper, cut them in strips, and rolled them up. The kids couldn't wait any longer, so they started eating the red fruit roll-ups, so I didn't have a lot to work with. These were gone in less than 30 minutes.
While you type up your comments, I'm going to tell you how the tradwife trend is harmful. First of all, it of course reinforces harmful gender stereotypes about women, but it also encourages women to try and pursue the tradwife lifestyle when it's unrealistic for most and pushes pressure towards perfection. But now let's move on and talk about the alpha male trend that became popular through TikTok and podcast platforms alike. Alpha male content has a huge focus on bringing back traditional masculinity and male dominance, often showcasing controversial views on gender roles and relationships. Most alpha male content creators try to push you something and mask it as helpful advice. Some encourage you to purchase cryptocurrency, promising you it will lead to financial success. Others tune into your insecurities and create an image you must fit in order to appear attractive to women, which leads them to selling you a personalized workout guide that will fix all your insecurities. While others push advice on dating and how to appeal to the female nature by saying, "Oh, to attract a woman, you must ignore their texts for 2 days. It'll make her want you more." And yes, that's actually been said before. I know. Ouch. Yet, in the alpha male space of creators, the most harmful and prominent was Andrew Tate himself, who before his ban self-proclaimed himself as a misogynist and expressed many controversial statements about women in order to push male dominance. Some of these controversial statements included saying women are the property that belong to men, and going as far to say women bear some responsibility for assault. So, forgive me, but here's a clip of Andrew Tate showcasing alpha male expectations.
Least discussed superpower on earth is being able to speak well. Yeah. Nobody talks about it. People talk about being strong, great. People talk about being rich, okay, fantastic. But being able to speak correctly and properly and very well is a completely under-discussed superpower. It's the reason I refuse to learn another language.
Her job is to make you happy. Her job is to make herself look good. Her job is to work out for your benefit. Blah, 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 blah. It is actually just misogyny.
Do you think a woman looking good has no benefit at all to her?
Of course it does.
Okay, so it's not for my benefit. I think a man should provide for a woman financially, completely and utterly. If she wants to work, if my partner were to say to me right now, I really feel like getting a job that would make me happy, then I'll say work. But she doesn't have to. Her job is looking after the children, looking after me, and being as happy as possible. I am a man, my life is stressful, my life is pain. I go to jail, I suffer, I have to deal with making money. I have constant endless headache. I do all of that so I can give you everything, but then I get to have you. Your job is to be here. I want you to smile. I want you to look your best and feel your best all of the time. Now, I go through so much pain so that we can be financially secure. So I hope the woman I care about does not have to work a job. If that makes me a bad person, then so be it. Because all I'm saying is I want to take care of her in every single realm. I take care of her physical safety. I take care of her financial security. That is my job as a man.
When you were put on house arrest, was there any moment that you cried from happiness?
I never cried from happiness, and I never cried from sadness, because I think crying is an act in and of itself. To cry is to sit and cry. I didn't do that. I did have tears run down my face.
Hey man, that's crying.
No, it's not, because I was busy. Having tears run down my face as I'm doing push-ups, or tears run down my face as I'm organizing the school for my child and my voice isn't breaking, is different than sitting and crying. I didn't sit and dedicate myself to crying. I didn't sit and do the act of crying. My eyes leaked as I achieved.
Okay, that was painful, but let's go through why alpha male content is harmful. It's extremely harmful because it promotes toxic masculinity, creating an unrealistic expectation of manhood, encouraging emotional suppression and misogynistic viewpoints in young men, going to the point where it glorifies such behaviors that contain aggression, hate, and an inability to be thoughtful of others. I think we all realize that a main theme in these two trends is that it pushes and idealizes unrealistic expectations to each gender. But now we must question, who is the audience for this type of content anyways? Well, that's a simple answer. These trends target people who are desperate to belong. Both the tradwife and alpha men trends rose to popularity during the pandemic, where most of us were alone in our homes, with no social interaction whatsoever. This left so many people feeling isolated and alone, to the point of falling into depression, which caused many to turn to social media for some type of comfort, or to just find somewhere where they could belong. According to Bu Zhan, an associate professor of communications at Penn State, he believes that the vital driving force behind those turning to social media is nothing but the trait of people being socially wired. Going further to say it's consistent with the evidence from psychologists who have discovered that the desire to form and maintain interpersonal attachments or the need to belong is a fundamental human motivation. So yes, it's a simple answer, because one thing we all have in common, no matter our gender, is the feeling of wanting to belong. And when we are desperate for that, we can easily be influenced by the things we see on social media. This is what encourages us to act on people-pleasing behaviors in order to conform to social standards. Let's first go over the definition of people-pleasing according to Psychology Today, that defines it as a pattern of behavior where someone prioritizes others' needs and wants over their own, often at the expense of their well-being. For women, people-pleasing behaviors are very common to act on, since we are told to be unconfrontational, and when we are met in an uncomfortable situation, we are expected to indulge in whatever that person said till the moment's over, since it's been wired in our brains that this sense of shame is our burden to carry, and that it's too troublesome and disrespectful of us to stop the interaction, or simply say no, because that's not what a woman is supposed to do. On the other hand, men don't have to worry about people-pleasing anyone, because they are often excused for not doing so, since it's perceived as a masculine behavior, leading women to be more likely to indulge men in people-pleasing behaviors than the other way around. This concept of what makes up masculinity can easily turn toxic, which leads us to our discussion of toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity, as told by verywellmind.com, is essentially the collection of harmful beliefs, tendencies, and behaviors rooted in traditional male roles, but taken to the extreme. Toxic masculinity is said to have three main aspects of toughness, referring to physical strength, emotional callousness, and aggressive behaviors of men. Second, there's anti-femininity, which is the rejection of anything considered to be traditionally feminine traits. Lastly, there's power, which is the constant pursuit of dominance towards all aspects of life. These main aspects of toxic masculinity encourage men to suppress their emotions, act on aggressive and violent behaviors, and indulge in the devaluation of women, along with homophobic attitudes. The concept of toxic masculinity is not only harmful to others, but insanely harmful to men, since they are constantly pressured to fit into the box of what a man should be, or else they will get criticized for being too girly, because that's something they are told they can never be, not in the slightest. This causes men to experience higher rates of depression and suicide risk. Most men never seek help when battling these issues, but when they try, it's very difficult for them to even open up due to emotional restraint. Therapists like Christian Brown have stated when dealing with male patients, they tend not to want to be associated with toxic masculinity, but are uncomfortable and unfamiliar with the territory, allowing themselves to present as vulnerable or sometimes even human to other men. This disconnect between vulnerability and male expectations is what starts a tough root to untangle within men, since even Brown stated he was unsure on how to help them, though his resolve was to better educate himself and take time with his male patients till they were ready to share their experiences and troubles. I know it's not the perfect resolution we were hoping for, but it's something. Even though we discussed how toxic masculinity is harmful to men, we can't ignore how it's also harmful towards women. As we already know, toxic masculinity places an importance on the devaluation of women, and this isn't a new experience for women either. It's a sad truth that many women go through their lives normalizing this behavior, and simply need to find ways around it. In the workplace alone, 88% of women have reported experiencing verbal harassment and discrimination. Yet this behavior isn't unique to the workplace. It can and has happened anywhere, with 97% of women from the ages of 18 to 24 have experienced sexual harassment in public spaces. It's no wonder the sales for safety devices have increased by over 200% in 2023. When women feel unsafe and can't do much about it. When women do try to ask for help, they commonly get told they're being paranoid and to simply get over it. How is this right when 71% of women reported feeling anxiety in male-dominated spaces? Can we really just be okay with, oh well, you're a girl, of course that's gonna happen? It shouldn't be a common experience for women to be catcalled in public, or even worse, get harassed. So many women experience anxiety and PTSD from the behavior and violence caused by men, influenced by toxic masculinity. So, in the description, I've linked a video by Vlad NCL when he went undercover dressed as a woman in New York to test the reactions he would get from men. It's an interesting watch, and I recommend it to any of my male viewers who want to see part of what us women experience on a daily basis. Even though I just talked a lot about the harmful effects from toxic masculinity, it wouldn't be right of me not to mention that this toxic behavior isn't only seen in men, but it can also be seen in women. This is what we call toxic femininity. Unlike toxic masculinity that often represents itself externally through aggression, toxic femininity is the opposite, that instead internalizes misogynistic beliefs and involves women restricting themselves to stereotypically feminine behaviors in the attempts to appeal to men. Instead of harming others, toxic femininity harms yourself, since it encourages excessive people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. It also often triggers competitive and jealous behavior towards other women, who they might feel threatened by. Women who exhibit toxic femininity tend to have the fear of being too much, or not enough. This fear is what fuels their insecurities, and what triggers that feeling of threat in the first place. Yet this fear causes these types of women to have excessive focus on their appearance, and accept mistreatment in relationships, to the point where they will prioritize others' needs before their own, all in the effort to be enough for somebody. It's basically the same concept that Buzan taught us before, how the need to belong is a fundamental human motivation. This is essentially what women who take a part of toxic femininity want. They want to belong, but they go about it in ways that only hurt them, because they believe that internalizing toxic expectations of women will make them more appealing. Even though toxic femininity shows us the internal harm women do in order to belong, it's not this way for all women. Some women willingly choose to embrace femininity and lean into the expectations. Women like Dr. Julianne, a retired educator and creator of the Modern Retro Woman blog, states her opinions on femininity by saying the following: I love being a feminine woman. I love all of the pots of potions that sit on my dresser. I love wearing perfume, makeup, and pretty clothes. All of the accoutrements of being a feminine woman make me feel special. Dr. Julianne isn't the only one who feels this way. Many other women share this same statement, but in recent years it has become criticized by the misconception that femininity equals weakness and the state of being powerless. But Dr. Julianne believes that these misconceptions are what causes women to adopt masculine behaviors in order to combat those misconceptions, which she calls this adaptation of women the fake man. She says that being a fake man stops women from being their true, authentic selves. She proceeds to encourage women to embrace their femininity without fault, if that means dressing up with your best clothes or finding joy in cooking homemade meals. It doesn't matter, since Dr. Julianne teaches us that it's okay to embrace what's feminine without worrying about what expectations say, since she found her own sense of belonging by being feminine. Chapter 3: The Cost of Stepping Outside the Box. If Dr. Julianne was able to find happiness in embracing her femininity, let's explore how people who go against their gender expectations feel, along with the type of responses they get for going outside the box. First, we have creators like Sarah N. Toon, with 747k followers on YouTube. Her content focuses on her enthusiasm for cars, where she will post car reviews and car repair tutorials, as she is a car mechanic. She is a perfect example to women that you can be anything despite what you're expected to be, since most women are expected to leave tough jobs like mechanics to men, who take over the mechanic industry by 95.7% compared to women with 4.3% in the mechanic industry. Sarah challenges these beliefs by taking on a male-dominated job and car culture. Even though Sarah gets a ton of support and appreciation from her fanbase for being genuine in her content and car builds, she still gets plenty of hate from people who question her expertise and technical abilities towards the craft just because she's a woman. She's even had to deal with certain viewers commenting on her appearance rather than the car content. Despite this, Sarah continues to make content and focus on the joy cars give her and simply ignore the haters. Next, we have a creator of the name Frederic Chen, who is a YouTuber with 1.25 million followers. His content revolves around social and LGBTQ+ commentary, makeup, and lifestyle. Frederic is known for challenging gender norms, as he pokes fun at the topic and shares deep discussions with his viewers about it while doing his makeup. While people love Frederic for not only his humor, but being a voice towards self-expression, he still gets an insane amount of hate on every video, criticizing his sexuality and use of makeup, hating how he chooses to embrace feminine ways of expression. Some have even gone as far as leaving harassing comments in his videos that include death threats and transphobic comments. The people who target his content are mostly those who identify as conservative and want to take down his voice. Despite the extreme hate he has gotten, he continues to create content and even humors his haters by poking fun at their comments, completely unfazed and proving that he is stronger than their words. Lastly, we have Mercury Stardust, a YouTuber with 270k followers and is known as the Trans Handyman. Her content focuses on DIY home repair tutorials and LGBTQIA+ advocacy. She is well loved for her infectious personality and connection to her fanbase, by often hosting live events and workshops, where she gives her viewers educational resources and tips for anything home repair. Despite all the love her fanbase has for her, Mercury Stardust has faced many criticisms and harassments. She has often been the target for many transphobic comments and campaigns that attempted to mass report her content so she'd be deplatformed. There would also be times she would host charity live streams for trans care, but her haters would get her account banned due to hating her content. Even though she has faced much hate for being a trans woman, she has never turned away from creating content and continues to educate others on not only home repairs, but also LGBTQIA+ awareness. Overall, these three creators have shown us that even through hate, you can keep creating, but most importantly, they showed us you can be true to yourself without feeding into expectation. Yet, even so, there are still creators that take advantage of this and use it for attention, not caring if it's harmful or not. A prime example of this is Josh Seiter, who appeared on the 2015 season of The Bachelorette. During May of 2024, Josh would claim to identify as a transgender woman, sharing his process of transitioning by wearing makeup and women's clothing, only to later reveal 5 months later that the whole process was a social experiment to, in his own words, expose how gullible and delusional the left is, and how he wanted to prove a point about gender ideology. Later, he would come out with controversial and hateful statements towards the transgender community. Josh would of course get a lot of hate for this social experiment because the supporters who believed him got betrayed, but it was a bigger burn for the transgender community who lended him support and advice, since in the end they were left with hate, causing extreme harm to the transgender community when they are already threatened by society. After the incident, Josh would disappear from social media before his account falsely announced his death, which he later claimed was the result of a hacking. All in all, we have seen how multiple people take on the challenge of going against gender norms on social media, but still come back on top by continuing to be their true selves without the fear of ridicule. Yet, of course, there will always be people who try to spread hate and undermine their accomplishments. But when that happens, you simply ignore them, since you know deep down where you belong, and that's as yourself. Chapter 4. Now, why should I even care? As we went through this journey together, we learned so much about gender expectations, along with how it affects us. But now we must ask ourselves, why does any of this even matter? Let's start by connecting the dots between our daily lives and social pressures. Just think about it. Have you ever stopped yourself from acting a certain way because it wasn't appropriate for your gender? If it was crying about a movie or having ambitious dreams, that moment of hesitation is the cost of gender expectations. And it's happening to everyone, no matter your culture, language, or country. This is a universal issue that's been overlooked and normalized. Remember how we discussed Dr. Carmen's list of factors that prevent people from expressing their true selves? She herself totally overlooked gender as a factor, and that's why we added it, since we are beginning to take notice of the problem at hand. Since when we limit ourselves or others based on these gendered expectations, we stifle growth, create unnecessary barriers between ourselves and the opposite sex, damage our mental health and self-expression, and worst of all, continue the harmful cycle that resulted from these expectations. Research even shows that gender-based restrictions cost the global economy $160 trillion in lost earning potential. But the real cost goes beyond money, when 78% of youth report feeling pressured to change how they present themselves in order to conform to gender norms, with 67% of workers reporting that they face gender-based discrimination on a daily basis. It's gone to a point of being a mental health crisis, with men being 4 times as likely to commit suicide than women due to rising pressures of toxic masculinity due to the disconnect between emotion and expectation, just like Buzan told us. How can we live in a world where we normalize this type of behavior, where we let people be torn apart by the pressure of trying to fit in these unrealistic boxes of gender? I know it might seem impossible to change the expectations that are so deeply rooted within our society. You might feel like it's not even worth it, since it would be too hard to enact change. If you feel this way, I get it, but let me tell you this. If not for yourself, do it for the children of the future that will look at our actions as the influence of what's normal. Since challenging and derooting expectations doesn't have to be hard, as long as we do something, even if it's small, since it doesn't take away that we are contributing to a better future. Mothers like Amy Beashel have already started this change by sharing her story on The Guardian. Amy describes to us that she herself acted on gender expectations, making comments of her 11-year-old daughter's appearance more than she would to her son. Yet Amy would have a moment of realization when she saw how a comment about her daughter's appearance from a male in his 70s affected her daughter so much, making her uncomfortable and have a sense of shame written all over her face. Even though Amy took notice of this, in the moment, she didn't say anything to the man. Amy herself states, "I was silenced by good manners. I didn't want to make him feel awkward. I was afraid to make a scene." This experience is the perfect example of the expectation to accommodate men and normalize the comments of sexism. But what did Amy do after this? Well, she apologized to her daughter for prioritizing a stranger's comfort over her own, and for teaching her to do the same. This experience caused Amy to have a deep discussion with her daughter about alternate responses she can say when put in a situation where she feels uneasy. If that's saying, "I'm not comfortable with what you said," or the simple yet strong, "No." Even if Amy made mistakes, she still did something to change the harmful expectations she was used to, so her daughter wouldn't have to normalize the same thing, showing us how changing expectations is possible if we try, and how it can lead to a better future. Chapter 5. What we can do. Now, how can we take a stand like Amy Beashel? Well, we must better educate ourselves and take notice of our part in gender expectations. Every time you judge someone's choices based on gender, stop and ask yourself, why does this bother me? Take notice of that discomfort and dig deeper. Notice when you're limiting yourself. Are you avoiding that gym class because you actually don't like it, or because it's not for your gender? And when you hear gender-limiting comments, speak up and put them in their place by using facts. You could say things like, "Oh, did you know companies with gender-diverse leadership often perform 25% better financially?" Let's also be supportive of the people who challenge gender norms by following and engaging with them in their content, even defending or being there for them as they encounter criticism for being different and expressing their true selves. Yet we still have to realize everyone is going to be on a different journey as we deroot the influence gender expectations have on us. So let's stay understanding, since after all, we are all just trying our best to belong. So instead of criticizing others' journeys, let's empathize with them and offer them encouragement on the way. Since every time someone breaks free from gender expectations, workplace innovation increases by 37%. Our mental health outcomes will improve. our youth will have better role models. And most importantly, our society will have become a more welcoming place where people can express their authentic selves without any fear of ridicule or criticism. This want of change isn't about forcing anyone to reject traditional gender roles either. It's about creating a choice so people can be free to choose who they want to be. Because the key is that it's your choice to make, not society's expectation. So here's my call to action for you. Are you up for the challenge? I sure hope so. Because today, I want you to challenge one gender norm within yourself. And be honest to yourself on how it has affected you. See how this makes you feel. And embrace that feeling of uncertainty, since it will lead to empowerment. I also encourage you to follow 3 creators that you find challenge gender expectations, since why not spread the love and support, am I right? Anyways, if you want to continue your journey educating yourself on gender expectations, here are some sources to check out for support. The book Gender Your Guide by Lee Ayrton, the book Delusions of Gender by Cornelia Fine, Gender Spectrum at www.genderspectrum.org, It Gets Better Project at www.itgetsbetter.org, and Mental Health at America at www.mhanational.org. Also feel free to check out the description of this video, which shows all the resources I used to make this video. Now before we part, my lovelies, remember that every time you break free from a gender expectation, you make it easier for someone else to do the same. Your small acts of authenticity today create the change for generations to come, since the real question isn't, why should I care? It's, how can I not? Oh wait, you didn't think I'd stop the video now, right? Before even sharing the results of the question that started off this whole video? Well, don't worry, I got you covered. According to my survey, most people, 85% in fact, chose the color that was expected of their gender. Isn't that interesting? I'll let you sit with that one. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, my lovelies, and see you next time.